Ow. Oh my god, this always happens. Oh dear. Okay. On May 6, 1994, Paula Jones accused then U.S. President Bill Clinton of sexual harassment. No one could have predicted that this singular accusation would lead to an impeachment of a government official. So I'll give you some little information. So the plaintiff, or the one who's making the accusations, is, as mentioned, Paula Jones. The defendant is Bill Clinton. Paula Jones, stated, or rather argued, that on May 8th, 1991, when Bill Clinton was Arkansas governor, so not U.S. president, he made crude and unwarranted sexual advances on her when she was a receptionist at the Excelsior Hotel in Little Rock, Arkansas. Jones would later elaborate on this, why she took so long to, come out. She stated that she was too scared to speak out for fear of losing her job, because obviously you're accusing a government official of such a heavy crime that could not only result in them being taken from office, but also, in prison. She also stated that she didn't want this to actually go to court. She wanted to settle outside and just have him admit guilt, but obviously that didn't happen. And so that was her argument. Clinton, his argument, he argued against this, saying that it never happened. But he kind of contradicted himself by saying if it did. So he's kind of contradicted himself. If it did happen, she made the advances on him. I don't know, that's just what he stated, so don't take that with me. Don't shoot the messenger. He also didn't want this to go to trial, but he still went with it because his reputation was on the line. He's the president, and this is a big scandal, so he didn't want any risk of it, people saying, oh, you didn't go to court, so you did it. When it did go to trial, Clinton wanted it put off till the end of his presidency, but the courts refused. So the trial was set for May 27, 1994. After being shuffled through lower courts and then to, federal, and then to eventually, it ended up in the Supreme Court. Not only because it, was involving the president, but it raised a very important constitutional question that I so kindly wrote for you all to see. Which is, the question is a serving president entitled to absolute immunity from civil alleviation if the said crime happened before they assumed office? Please excuse the grammar. And ultimately, this is why the courts agreed to hear it, and ultimately why it did go to the Supreme Court, because of that question. The answer to that question is no. They all ruled, all of the justices ruled in a unanimous vote that no. A president is not entitled to absolute immunity from the judicial process regardless if the crime happened before or after they assumed office. The court even added that despite the procedural burdens which Article 3 jurisdiction may impose on the time, attention, and resources of the chief executive, the Constitution does allow branches to execute power over the others if necessary. A good example of this is vetoing. So even though the legislative branch makes the laws, the president can still influence that and execute power over the legislative branch, or the executive branch. The president's part of the executive branch, by vetoing the bill. So he can basically say, I don't really like this, write a little cute note and say, and throw that thing in the trash. Congress can go back and say, we have majority, we have 2/3 majority, so that's it. But ultimately, the president does have to say, so he can execute power over the other. Even though the courts ruled this, Clinton still won the case. Ultimately, Jones did lose. And so here's some cute little headlines for you, which is, this was from Newsweek. It was talking about, obviously, the case and, whether or not she should be heard. Because, it is kind of sad to say that sometimes people do accuse people of things that they didn't do. So it was kind of questioning that. That's not to say that she is lying, but you have to be somewhat skeptical of these things because they can be false. It has happened. And then we have another headline that is going to be a little more important about what we talked about. Now, as I said earlier, this led to Clinton's impeachment. So, also, I forgot to mention, that was the opinion. That was the only opinion written that I could find, so I forgot to mention that. But as I said earlier, this resulted in his impeachment. And what I meant by that is this case didn't, but something in it did. Paula Jones was not actually the only person to speak out against Clinton. There were many other women, but there was one particular woman that really stood out from the crowd. And that woman was Monica Lewinsky. And what made her stand out is that she was having an affair with Bill Clinton. Now, by this time, Bill Clinton had a wife and I believe some kids. So, it's pretty messed up, dude. You got a wife and kids. You kind of pledged, I'm with you forever. But apparently he wasn't. So, yeah. But she was having this affair while he was president. That's crazy. But to make it 10 times worse, she worked in the Oval Office as a part of the White House staff. Yeah, so that's why this picture exists. Because if you know anything about the president and the White House, this is the Oval Office. This picture was taken in the Oval Office. That's how this picture exists, because she was an intern. He was the president. So yeah, this caused an absolute uproar in the media. And that's what led to this famous headline. Look at his little pouty face. Yeah, you should have that face because you just got outed for being a freaking cheater, dude. God, be loyal to your wife. I mean, come on. But it says, liar, liar, after months of denials, Clinton tells nation, grand jury, of inappropriate relationship with Monica Lewinsky. This actually happened in the case, which was, really weird, because he not only was denying this, but he was also denying this. But maybe this one, did happen because he was so adamant, but he did go back and say, yeah, I did do that. And obviously this scandal led to his impeachment. So even though this case didn't lead to that impact, it did help sort of lay the groundwork for it to ultimately happen, which is very impactful because, the president of our country is getting removed from office and someone else is stepping in for him. But it also impacted America, and I'd argue an even more significant way, which was that it proved that at the core of our system, our justice system, it is just. Because not even the most important man in America could escape the hammer of justice. It ultimately rained down on him. He tried to escape it. That's, as I said earlier, he tried to put off the trial. But the court said, no, you committed a crime. We have to talk about it. We have to, this has to happen. You can't escape the judicial process. Which is vitally important, extraordinarily important, especially in this day and age. Now, maybe back then wouldn't have been as important, but now it's more prevalent than ever, because it feels like nowadays big business people or even celebrities, they get away with anything and everything just because they have money and fame. But the court basically kind of proved that wrong, because this man right here, he's the president. He has all the money in the world, and he rules this whole country. He, in a way, rules the courts. But even he had to face the justice system, which is insane. So that proved that, yes, admittedly, our justice system is flawed. it makes mistakes, but at the core of it, it does uphold the values of our country, and it tries to uphold truth and justice and the American way. And it's not really the system itself that's the problem, it's kind of just the people in it that make it a problem. And sometimes I would like to argue, in my opinion, that sometimes you do need gray area in the law. But you really can't have it sometimes. You can't have it a lot of the time because there's no gray area in victims. There's no gray area in that it either did happen or it didn't. It can't really be in between. You either robbed that guy or you didn't. You either you slept with that woman or you didn't. And the courts ruled against it. I think that this case was ultimately fairly settled. And the reason I think that is basically because, if I'm being completely honest, neither of them really had a sufficient argument. Like, they did have an argument, yes, but the evidence in them were really weak. It was basically just, she said, he said, oh, she said something different, he said something way different. They kind of just went back on their statements a couple times, and that's not to say that, she was lying or he was lying. That's just stating, what I could find, which I always had. It was really hard to find information on this case, surprisingly. I thought that because, this involved the president, it'd be even popular, but I guess not. But yeah, so I think that, ultimately, I think this case was fairly settled. I think Clinton should have won the case. And I think that, because she didn't even get, I think she got maybe a little bit of money out of it, but that was it. But this case was thrown out. Like, it was actually thrown out at the end. So, I ultimately do think this case was fairly settled, because neither one of them really had sufficient evidence. And when you're the plaintiff, you're the accuser, you really gotta have evidence. So yeah, that was the case. The case of Jones v. Clinton that ultimately shook America in the 90s to its core, because it was a scandal. It was a big scandal. So, yeah, that was the case. And I hope you guys enjoyed the podcast. I'm going to show you my sources. There are my sources. So, yeah. I'm a podcast producer, and this was the podcast. So I hope you enjoyed. See you guys later.